Presentation title shown: Collective Leadership and Building Psychologically Safe Teams.
Welcome to the Collective Leadership and Building Psychologically Safe Teams SWEVE session. My name is Tiffany Haynes, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am a lived experience engagement specialist here at the Capacity Building Center for States.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ishan Peterson. My pronouns are also she, her, hers, and I am the Racial Equity and Lived Expertise Lead at the Capacity Building Center for States. Welcome to our community.
And here on the screen, you'll see Shanetta Stewart listed. She was our co-presenter yesterday, but also contributor to developing today's session. So I just wanted to take space to acknowledge her. So before we get started, I wanted to go ahead and give you all a moment to download the session worksheet. Our tech support will be dropping the worksheet in the chat. The worksheet can be used as a guide for you today in case that, looking at the chat or the screen is a little difficult for you. You can use it also to guide the discussion. The worksheet has reflection questions that we'll be discussing, resources and tips in that document. But I did want to ask you all to not focus so much on the other information, as that is intended for you to use post-session with your team or to reflect on your own. And if for some reason folks can't download the document from the chat, feel free to use a piece of paper, but we'll be having some really meaningful and intentional discussion during the session. So here you'll see our community agreements that will be centering as we engage today. And these agreements help ground us and ensure that we preserve the safety, engagement, and equity in the space. And I'm going to go ahead and read them out loud so that we can take them in together. All right. Treat this space as a judgment-free and respectful zone. Treat this space as a learning space. Ensure diverse representation and participation. That could look like take space, make space for people. Engage in considerate communication. And recognize that organizational power relationships are at play and strive to mitigate them. All right, so before we hop into the session, I do want to ask that folks be mindful to keep your mics on mute and your cameras off as we are presenting. You do have privilege to unmute yourself and turn your mic and turn your video on, but we're asking that you do that when it's time for discussion so that folks can focus on the presentation when we're not in discussion mode. All right, so for today's session, we have three main objectives. So during the session, we will collaborate with each other to strengthen one another's ability to foster psychological safety, bravery, cultivate resilience, and supportive work environments. We will engage in interactive learning and discussion and explore more practical strategies and resources aimed at nurturing supportive cultures and enhancing well-being. And by delving into topics such as psychological safety, inclusive teaming, neutralizing power, and resilience, we hope that you're able to gain a deeper understanding of these concepts and depart the session with actionable insights and a renewed commitment to creating environments that foster growth, inclusivity, and resilience. And I want to emphasize that this is going to be a shared or bi-directional learning space. So we're here presenting with you all, facilitating the workshop, but just as much as you'll be learning, we'll be learning from you as well. So please, 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 just be here, be present, and engaged today. And thank you all for showing up. All right, so let's get started. As child welfare professionals, you all may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs was informed by Blackfoot Nation's beliefs, and this sets a predicator around psychological safety being a basic human need in development. And we feel it's important for you to take time to curate a mental safety room. So this will serve as a space where you can mentally take breaks and be proactive or retreat as a reactive measure to things in the space that might become triggering. Psychological safety sounds like a sweet topic, but sometimes it can get a little deep. And if you need that space to be able to retreat, then I want you all to take a moment to set that for yourself. So, one aspect of psych safety is how we self regulate and how we safety plan. So, here's your opportunity to do that. So, on your worksheet, as well as on the screen, you'll see two prompts. One is name some things that make you feel safe, and the other is name some things that make you feel brave. And for this one, as we move on to the next slide, I'm hoping that you all can drop your responses in the chat, after you take a moment to reflect on what that actually means for you. Ishan, did you want to add anything?
No, I just love the fact that, we're starting with Maslow's because safety is the foundation, right? It's the second tier up beyond our psychological needs or physiological needs. And so safety is critical. It's a part of our foundation and we need it in every space that we're in. And so it's so important that we start there. I love it. All right, y'all. So thank you, Tiffany, for the visual of the hierarchy and of safe and brave spaces that will help us unpack this really necessary and important conversation. It's so critical for us to get to self-actualization in so many ways, but we can't do that unless we have those foundations. And so that is super critical. So here we are, y'all. We're going to have a whole conversation about psychological safety, bravery, power dynamics. And in order to do that, we need to be on the same page as to how we define those things. And so we're going to give you some definitions here. Now, these might be different definitions than what you have worked with, but this is what we're going to use for today's conversation. So psychological safety plays a pivotal role in fostering environments where meaningful, and I mean meaningful actions towards equity can thrive. It forms really the bedrock for our transformative practices with children, young people, and our families. Fostering psychological safety creates environments where members feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And let me tell you, you're going to hear that word vulnerable, vulnerability over and over and over during this presentation because it is critical, right? We want you to be authentic. You'll hear that multiple times, right? And be brave in your contributions, along with feeling support and encouragement for individuals to express their thoughts, concerns, and ideas without fear of judgment or reprisal. That's really important. I have felt psychologically safe when I've had facilitators like Tiffany, like Shanetta, who really are leaders and play a crucial role in driving my psychological safety, right? And it should be noted that individual factors also influence the feelings of safety, right? Each team member has a role to play in cultivating an atmosphere of trust, respect, and openness, whether it's through active listening or offering support or demonstrating empathy. Each of us has the power within our role and within our authority to foster an environment where everyone feels valued and heard, and empower every team member to contribute to create psychological safety in the team. This is a collective effort. And I know Shanetta said it yesterday, but it's a collective effort today, tomorrow, next year. It's always a collective effort. And it requires commitment and action from all team members at all times, right? By prioritizing openness and vulnerability and inclusivity, we can create environments that not only support individual well-being, but also drive meaningful change within our child welfare system. And ultimately, that's what we're doing this work for. So now that we have defined psychological safety, you may discover yourself thinking through psychologically safety and how you have seen that in the past, how you may have not seen that in the past. So as we reflect on that definition for psychological safety, here's a short list of the do's and don'ts, right? This is not an exhaustive list, okay? So there may be other things that you should be doing or not doing. But for now, this is what we're going to rock with, okay? So do foster accountability, right? You want to really encourage open dialogue and mutual accountability for actions and outcomes. Accountability is crucial. Without accountability, all initiatives fail, right? You have to have it. It is the bedrock and the foundation of all things, right? So take ownership of individual and team contributions and commitments, and do not shield your members from accountability. Hold folks accountable in a supportive and constructive manner, because that fosters a culture of trust and responsibility. We also want you to encourage healthy dissent, okay? Welcoming diverse perspectives and constructive criticism as opportunities for growth and innovation is critical to our growth. Don't create a false sense of harmony by avoiding conflict or suppressing dissenting voices, because everyone has a different experience, a different perspective, and a different lens because they've lived a different life than you. And that's okay. And two things can be true at the same time. And so you want to embrace healthy debate and disagreement as opportunities for learning and growth for yourself and for your team. We want you to empower learning and growth, right? Empower your members to learn and make mistakes. That's where the good work happens, is where the mistakes happen, right? Recognizing that learning often involves trial and error. Don't overprotect folks from anxiety or fear or discomfort. Sometimes when that happens, we like to jump in and try to fix the situation for folks. Let folks sit in it. Let them do some reflection. Why am I feeling this way? Why did I say this? Why do I have this reaction? Why are they reacting that way? Ask yourself some questions, but allow people to have the space to do that reflection. Provide support and encouragement for experimentation and growth. That could be your role instead of fixing. Now, this is a big one. So important. We want you to neutralize power differentials. And we're going to talk a lot about power dynamics in a little bit. Tiffany's going to drop some gems for us there. But psychological safe teams neutralize the power differential, all right? It's not just about sharing power, because that still denotes that someone has more power than the others. It really means that we are leveling the playing field where all voices are heard, valued, regardless of rank or status or role, right? We often think of power sharing at the ultimate form of, and that it's the most important thing that we do. But consider that if we stay at power sharing, there's still that differential. Power neutralizing creates the level environment for psychological safety. They do not necessarily make decisions through consensus, right? When you're in a neutralizing power situation. But collaboration and consensus building are important. Okay, so we don't want to say you shouldn't do those things, because there is a space for that work and it's important work. Okay, but psychological safety in teams also recognizes the value of decisive leadership when needed. All right, neutralizing power, consensus where needed, decisive leadership where needed. You have to be able to decide when and where to pull what lever. Okay. Now, this one's also really important. We do want you to minimize the likelihood of traumatic experiences, because you know what? Life creates traumatic experiences for many people. Okay. And in early childhood, you can have a lot of things go on that hit you differently. And as team members, we don't know the experiences of all of our team members. Okay. And the things that may activate them later in life. And so we need to approach things with empathy, right? A workplace that seeks to minimize the likelihood of traumatic experiences by prioritizing safety and empathy and sensitivity in their interactions and decision-making processes is an absolute way to do the work, okay? Unfortunately, we must note that we cannot eliminate the possibility of traumatic experiences entirely, right? Because again, everyone has a different experience. But you can strive to minimize the risk and prioritize safety and support for those who are affected when it happens. I often find myself thinking about the environment that I'm leading at work, the teams that I'm leading, And I ask myself, and I want you to ask yourself, is this a place that you would want a dear friend to work? Is this a place that you would want a dear relative to work? Is this a place that you would want your child to work in? And if you say no to any of those answers, then we absolutely have some work to do around psychological safety. All right? And that's important. Now, we also want you to promote autonomy and respect, right? Really try to promote opportunities to earn autonomy, allowing individuals to take ownership of their work and make meaningful contributions to the team's goals. Foster an atmosphere of respect where team members feel valued and heard and are respected for their unique perspectives and contributions. And last but certainly not least, do rely on a culture modeled by leadership. Okay, where leaders demonstrate vulnerability and openness and a commitment to inclusivity, setting the tone for the entire team. Okay, they don't need to advance any particular political agenda, but instead focus on creating an inclusive and equitable environment where all voices, again, are valued and respected. Now, our hope is that embodying these principles, we can create environments where individuals feel safe, they feel empowered, they feel motivated to contribute to their best of their ability. And that ultimately fosters resilience, innovation, and growth within your teams. Tiffany, you have anything to add to this?
I don't have anything to add, but I do have a reflection on something that you just shared. For me, what one of the powerful things that you just shared are those reflection questions. Would it be a space that you would want someone near and dear to you
Mm.
to exist in and have to function in? Um, and that for me, when I exist in a space, I think about not just myself, but others around me.
Mhm.
And I just think that that was very powerful. Also, like the emphasis that you do have to do personal reflection, in the process of thinking about how you contribute to psychological safety in the space, just as
Mhm.
much as you think about what do I need from a space that's going to create safety. So it's the both and again, that mutual, that flow of uh contribution and reception.
Absolutely. It's easy to think about other people and what they are or are not doing. It's much harder for us to think about ourselves and what we are and are not doing to contribute to a space. So you're absolutely right. It is bidirectional. It has to be both ways. I love it. So, okay, y'all, here we go. Now that we've talked a little bit about the do's and don'ts, we want to engage with you all. We want to have a discussion, okay? We're going to invite you to engage in our first discussion for today, okay? We are going to talk about these prompts. We're going to take the PowerPoint down because our wonderful tech team has placed the prompts in the chat. Right? For this first discussion, this is an opportunity for our collective community to come together into our space. We want y'all to share examples, any insights or experiences related to psychological safety and its impact on our ability to navigate setbacks and challenges effectively. So please take a moment to reflect on the discussion prompts that you see and let's get going. All right. So, what are some of your behaviors or situations that you have observed or experienced yourself in the workplace that demonstrate psychological safety? And how does psychological safety contribute to your ability to bounce back from setbacks and challenges in the workplace? All right, I'm going to stop sharing. I invite you all to raise your hand so that we can call on you. Once we call on you, feel free to come on camera and share. You also have the opportunity to drop your feedback in the chat. All right. All right, y'all. So there's 118 of us on this call. And I know for me, there have been some instances where I have seen good psychological safety. So I want to hear what that looks like for you all.
I think for beginners, just validating my feelings and my experiences and what I'm going through before directing what I need to do next.
Oh, I love that, right? Validation, right? You don't have to agree to validate, right? You don't have to agree, but
You
that
don't even
validation
have
goes
to
a long way.
you don't even have to understand to validate that a person You don't have to understand from point A to B to validate that someone has a reaction or feelings about a thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's creating that space of acknowledgement and just letting people go through that motions of what they're experiencing in that moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see in the chat, leaders doing what they say, right? That follow through critical for psychological safety. Absolutely. Um, I really love this coffee chat idea, a space for folks to be able to share ideas and concerns. Um, Mariana?
Hi, good morning. Yeah, think for me, one, active listening, right? When somebody really is engaging in that kind of conversation, you feel in a safe space. But I also know, like we said, like not everybody's going to agree, but we always say here, we got to have productive conflict. Like we might have two different, but understanding that we're not going to go like, I'm going to go in the back and I'm going to do all the things and say, hey, like we might be in a space that we can have a comfortable conversation, both engage in listening and understanding, even get a third party in just to kind of because we all view things differently. We all experience things differently. So we're always saying productive conflict is okay. Like just don't make sure it stays out of bounds and respecting each other's. And that's really, for me, a safe space. If I'm uncomfortable with the situation and being comfortable enough to speak on that, that's a safe space. And so that doesn't harbor any kind of mal wishes or anything that leads to other things that kind of spill over.
Absolutely, right? Productive conflict. I love that. Tiffany?
I saw something in the chat, making space for developing personal relationships and team building versus always being task oriented, and being open to creative out of the box ideas. Believe it or not, that's actually, in my perspective, DEI practice. How are we being inclusive? How are we being intentional about acknowledging each other's culture, noticing one another? How are we debunking white supremacy in the work that we do on a day to day? So I love that you named that, Rebecca. Kyle?
Thanks. So I appreciate you both for creating a safe space here. The thing that stuck out to me was the contradiction or the kind of the distinction between a healthy dissent, but then also rather than false harmony, because so many times, especially in child welfare, we're all like, oh, we're all on the same page, we're all a big happy family, we're doing this the right way. And yes, there's an element of that, and that could also fester if people start to disagree, but kind of clearing the air and saying, all right, let's kind of respect everybody's different opinion, and that's okay. To me, that was really powerful. So thanks.
Kyle, you you lifted something. I was doing some research on empathy, and one of the things that was said is there's this presumed code of ethics that people who work in child welfare all exude and practice empathy, and we're all these really empathetic and understanding and great people. And reality is we have to work to that. Like it's not always a presumed state of being just because of the work that we're in. And so I love that you named what you just named. And I think hopefully that will allow people to be more intentional instead of operating in autopilot and based off of presumptions.
Absolutely. I just want to elevate a couple more things I saw in the chat. Now, listen, I hope that y'all are taking the opportunity to copy and paste right in your OneNote, right on your piece of paper, because there are gems being dropped, there are strategies being dropped. And so please feel free to take those with you outside of this space, right? But two things I want to note before we move on. Erin mentioned setting up a space that is calm with no distractions. I know in an agency I ran prior to this, we had a meditation room, a calm room, right? So what does your space look like? And if you can't create a space like that, what does the environment look like, right? And then for yourselves, what does your desk look like? What does your office look like? Right? That calm space can really help folks feel safer in their environments. And the last thing I want to highlight is Karen mentioned leadership opportunities regardless of title. Leadership is not what you do, it's who you are. And so that's really important, right? It's not your title, It's who you are and how you show up, not what you do as job. Okay. All right, y'all. I'm going to get back to sharing the screen. Lots of amazing strategies in the chat. All right. Hopefully, we're back to sharing the screen here. All right.
All right. So thank you, Ishan. Great job laying the framework for what psychological safety looks like, what it is, and what it isn't. And thank you all so much for participating in that discussion. It was a lot of very insightful and fruitful information being shared. So now let's delve into the concepts of safe spaces and brave spaces and their interconnectedness in fostering resilience within the child welfare workforce. These two types of spaces complement each other and have a combined impact on promoting a supportive and empowering environment for those working in child welfare. And I'll start by defining what safe and brave spaces are, well, defining characteristics of what it is, and their significance in the context of what we're talking about today. So safe spaces prioritize emotional and physical safety, fostering a sense of security and trust amongst participants. In contrast, brave spaces encourage discomfort and vulnerability, pushing individuals to confront difficult truths and engage in courageous conversations about social issues. There you go. Healthy dissent. Moving into uncomfortability, and debunking the idea that uncomfortability means that you are not safe. And if you notice, anytime growth happens, you're usually in a space of uncomfortability before. Safe spaces provide a nurturing environment for individuals to share their experiences and challenges without fear or judgment of harm. There you go. Something else that y'all lifted up. It doesn't feel safe when you feel like that if you share a thing, if you communicate a thing, that your hands are going to be slapped all the time. There is a need for opportunity for growth. On the other hand, brave spaces challenges individuals to step outside of their comfort zone, confront those biases, and actively work towards social justice and equity. That requires intentionality. So together, these spaces create a dynamic environment that promotes both safety and growth and contributing to the resilience of our child welfare workforce.
Screen reads, "A note about bravery." And there is an image of a Venn diagram with one circle labeled scared and the other labeled doing it, and the overlapping section labeled bravery.
When we fail to speak out against injustices or systemic issues within our work, we perpetuate cycles of harm and disparities. It's not enough to simply go through the motions of our job. We must actively work to dismantle harmful practices, challenge biases, and advocate for equitable policies and services. Bravery is a critical virtue within the realm of child welfare, where the stakes are incredibly high for vulnerable youth and families, particularly those of color and those most impacted by our child welfare system and our workforce. As Lavie Aya Jones astutely notes, many people associate consequences with speaking up or taking a stand. They fear potential repercussions, whether it's pushback from colleagues, from discomfort in challenging the status quo, or even professional consequences. However, it is crucial to recognize that the ultimate harm lies in the impact on youth and families. And by remaining silent or passive in the face of injustice or wrongdoing within the child welfare system, we perpetuate systemic inequalities and put the well-being of those we serve at risk. Youth and families, especially those from marginalized communities, they rely on us to advocate for their rights, safety, and dignity. And I think a lot of times we forget the dignity piece on what it means to serve while preserving others' dignity. Bravery in child welfare context means acknowledging fear and discomfort, but understanding that our silence can have devastating consequences. Again, when we fail to speak out against those injustices, it perpetuates a cycle of harm and disparities. In the words of Aya LaVie Jones, do the right thing anyway. And let's embrace bravery as a necessary tool for driving positive change in child welfare and ensuring that all youth and families are supported and respected and have access to the opportunities that they deserve. So now we're going to move into our second discussion. And we're going to take the PowerPoint screen down. So be ready so that we can see your beautiful faces. And also, we respect if you cannot join us on camera. And raise your hands and unmute your mic if you do want to share out loud. And we do also still have space in the chat for folks to engage in the chat as well. So the first prompt is, how can Brave Spaces, well, the prompt is, how can Brave Spaces contribute to building resilience? And we want you all to share examples of personal experiences of safe and brave spaces that have positively impacted the resilience of yourself or even others. I see you, Suzanne. Is it Suzanne or Susan? Susan. Okay. I'm going to get it right, Susan.
So for me, I came from an unsafe place to the state of Maryland for child welfare. And so it was interesting because I could feel my reactions in certain situations where my go-to was, this is unsafe. But then by practice, everybody just kept showing up, consistently showing up, consistently asking my thoughts or opinions on things. And eventually, because of that consistency, I was able to feel safe and be able to engage and participate. And I came with lived experience. So, that it took time, but definitely now I feel like I work with people who it's a very safe space to be able to contribute.
Susan, can I say how much I appreciate that reflection? Let me tell you, I worked in an environment that was so toxic that when I went to the next one, I was on high alert all the time because I
Yes.
believed that they were going to do things that were done in the last organization. And so your comment makes me reflect on how I had to check myself, right? Heal myself, right? In order to allow folks to bring me in a safe way, right? I had to do some work too, because those toxic work environments can really have an impact on how you show up and ultimately how you do your work, right? So at the end of the day, it impacts youth and families too. So I just really love that reflection about how important it was to be in that new environment.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to share? The chat is slow, so that must mean folks want to talk. No. So, Aaron, I see you drop something in the chat. Did you want to unmute, or would you like for me to lift up what you just shared? So we have young lived expertise leaders have been the ones that have created the brave spaces that have helped me grow the most and prepared me to have difficult conversations that I have needed to have. I am stronger, wiser, and more resilient because of it. Thank you so much, Erin, for lifting the power of integrating lived expertise in the workforce and how they can have meaningful impact beyond just sharing their stories. Thank you. And it also shows that just because we are in the roles of helping to fix those systemic issues and serve does not mean that we're not also learning and growing from the engagement. So I appreciate you lifting that. We have some other folks. Did anyone else want to share anything out loud? Come on, Mariana. I hope I said it right.
You're close, Mariana. You're close, you're close.
Mariana. Okay, thank you.
So no, you're fine. And so I really want to echo what Susan said. But also I think even for myself, right? 17 years in child welfare, that's that's a span of some times in some different organizations. And so some really great, amazing foundational organizations. And there was a time stint where it was some toxic in the middle. And then you do go like super high alert on the next job to be like, but then and I'm just speaking my truth, is as I've grown in the industry, also having to check myself, not so much for the hypersensitivity, but even being if I'm in a different toxic environment, making sure that I'm vocalizing to my partners or collaborate, whoever is with me. I don't want to be, well, it's not as bad as, remember when we were over here? Like, I don't want to diminish a different toxic environment in comparison to another, right? Because our lived experiences with different toxic environments, toxic can look, in different ways, right? And so I think in conversations with colleagues and just our counterparts and saying, and I've heard it before, they're like, oh yeah, like, oh, it's annoying, but man, it wasn't as bad as that. And I'm trying to get to a space to be like, it shouldn't be like that, period, right? And us having that comparison, and us, for those of color, like I cannot continue to allow things and just put, oh, but they're nicer than it was in this other space. And so really navigating that and checking myself so that when I do have my counterparts that are, oh, but we're not as bad as that. We shouldn't be bad at all. Like that shouldn't be the substandard of, if a toxic is toxic, regardless of different types of toxic, and just making sure that my hypersensitivity is not on that everything, but also not diminishing a medium level toxic lifestyle to be okay because it wasn't as bad as the other one. So that's kind of where I'm at right now in my life, and really trying to navigate. And also, just to add to the lived experience, I have somebody on my team with lived experience, and I'm like, I need to learn from you. Like, what can we do better so that if we were at your case, right, when you were a teenager getting removed, what did you need? And what can we do to make it look different? And really trying to highlight lived experiences. So I just wanted to highlight those two things. I think, thank you for sharing that. It really did increase me, because I think for us, sometimes in child welfare, it can be, like Kyle said earlier, like, harmonious and hearts, like it's not all the time, and just addressing things that need to be addressed, of course, in a polite way, but also just not accepting those things just because it's not as toxic as the previous place that you were at.
Thank you, Mariana. Shalonda?
Thanks, Tiffany. When I think about this, I think about the power of one, right? And how sometimes it just takes one brave person who's in a space to speak up and say something that someone else could be thinking, and how affirming that can be when what you've said resonates with other people. And so I just wanted to lift that up in the space, that sometimes all it takes is one brave person to sort of start a wildfire, or to have some thought or practice or something really catch on and resonate with others.
I really appreciate everything folks were sharing, both out loud and in the chat. And I think for me, one thing that I started to think more about as you all were speaking was how important it is to notice ourselves, what we are feeling, how we are responding to the moment, how we are engaging, the power of self reflection and self awareness in the process of creating safe spaces and brave spaces. It's not just about how we pour out to other people, but being reflective in a way that, okay, we know that this thing might be triggering for me. So now let me think about how do I communicate that to my team so my team knows how to show up for me and how we can move in a way that's not harmful. Or hey, I know that I've had experience with this jurisdictional partner or partner before. Let me think about how do we safety plan so that we can still get the work done, but we're not creating an unsafe space for myself and my colleagues to exist in. And I think that's the power of being self-aware, because then you can anticipate and then you can plan. And again, you're not going to be able to plan and anticipate everything, but I think a part of creating a psychologically safe space is being noticing the dynamics that are present and not ignoring them.
Absolutely, Tiffany. Someone put in the chat, rewarding people for speaking out, help others feel safe, like celebrating it, acknowledging it, saying it out loud, right? Sometimes we do things and no one notices and no one says anything, and it discourages us from continuing that positive behavior. So just like positive reinforcement, right? When you see someone doing something that is supportive of your team, acknowledge it, right? In the way that they like to be acknowledged. And then the last thing, Katie put in the chat, any advice about how to identify psychological safe workplaces during interviews? Shalon put a great response in there. I'm telling you, the time in an interview for you to assess psychological safety is when you get to ask questions, right? You can assess a little bit of it by the way they ask you questions and what questions they ask, but really take time to craft questions in your interview that will give you some of that insight, right? We gave you a list of characteristics to look for. And so when you get this PowerPoint at the end, feel free to pull that and really think about some questions that will lend you to whether they are doing or not doing those things on that list, okay? But really take the time to ask those questions. If anybody else has feedback for Katie as to questions that she could ask, please feel free to drop it in the chat. All right, I'm going to share the screen again.
Thank you. So now that we've had this lovely conversation, I want to bring us back to the understanding that safe spaces and brave spaces are not mutually exclusive. Rather, they complement each other in fostering resiliency within the child welfare workforce. Safe spaces provide the foundation of support and trust necessary for individuals to engage in brave conversation about difficult topics such as systemic oppression, racism, and bias. Brave spaces, in turn, challenge individuals to confront their biases and engage in critical reflection and actively work towards social justice and equity. By combining these two types of spaces, organizations can cultivate a resilient workforce that feels supported, empowered, and equipped to navigate the complexities of the child welfare system. Resilient professionals are better able to cope with stress, adversity, and trauma, leading to improved job satisfaction, retention, and overall well-being. And how we know how turnover looks like in child welfare. Oh, how we know. So, yes.
So that part, right? Turnover, right? When we're not seeing safe spaces, that contributes to that, right? So you can say it again so that the whole world hears. Safe spaces plus brave spaces equals resiliency, and we have to have that. So now that we understand what brave space is, It's important to really talk about what makes a team inclusive. All right. So, again, like we did in the beginning, we want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we have a shared understanding of what we are talking about. Right. So, what you see on the screen is the definition that we at the Capacity Building Center for States use for inclusion. Okay. This refers to people with different backgrounds feeling welcomed and valued, and encompasses the process of working towards this state, right? Towards the state of inclusivity. What makes a team inclusive? Well, first and foremost, depends on the needs, the characteristics, and the context of that specific team. So it's also really important and critical to not just use a working definition, but to really ensure that your team, one, contributes to that definition, right? They're saying what they consider an inclusive team to mean, and that you're operationalizing that. Okay. So let's lean in, and feel free to write some characteristics on your piece of paper again in your OneNote. But here's some characteristics, and hopefully this will help Katie as well, of an inclusive team, right? Really look at this list. It again is non-exhaustive, right? So there are additional things that could be on here. But these are some of the characteristics that can help create safe spaces where everyone can feel comfortable participating, sharing leadership, neutralizing leadership, acknowledging and celebrating differences, facilitating an awareness of biases, and consistently reevaluating how the team can better work towards an inclusive environment, right? These are just some of the characteristics that we can see, okay? So what's really important, right, is to understand that an inclusive team thrives in a safe environment, okay? Psychological safety is rooted in inclusion safety, right? I think we all have heard, or many of us have heard about, safety science. I know when I used to work in a hospital environment prior to going into social work in this wonderful industry that we're in, I worked in a hospital. And safety science said that every time you go into a patient's room, you need to sanitize your hand. And every time you walk out of a patient's room, you need to sanitize your hand. And because it was socialized, it was messaged, and no one got in major trouble when you did it wrong. When you walked out of the room and forgot to sanitize your hand, someone would just say, hey, wash your hands, right? There was no like fear that, you're going to get written up, because it was just a part of the culture, right? Anyone could say something to each other, and no one felt disrespected or devalued or any of those things by someone just saying, hey, just remember to wash your hands. That's safety science, right? So inclusion safety is what this is rooted in, okay? Where team members feel genuinely welcomed and valued. Inclusion is more than tolerance, all right? We're not asking you to tolerate people. We're asking you to go a step further. It means inviting others into the team without fear of rejection or humiliation, really trying to enhance the confidence and resilience of each other, right? This involves treating all team members as equals, recognizing that everyone's expertise is valuable and complementary, right? And different is good, right? Because again, we all have a different experience and perspective, and we may be able to open ourselves up when someone is sharing something different from us. Now, it is not just about psychological safety, right? It is also about physical safety, right? So I mentioned earlier about having calm spaces, right? It is equally important to ensure that everyone's equipment works properly, and that they have all had equal training opportunities, right? That their environment is conducive to doing the work, right? You want to support basic needs like eating, right? I don't know how many times folks say to me that they haven't eaten all day, right? That's critical to fuel your body, okay? So that you can do the important work that you're doing, right? And I don't know about you, but I get hangry, okay? And that will impact the way that I show up at work. And so eat, take breaks, move around, move your body, right? A lot of us do remote work, so stand up, right? Invest in standing desk if you can, right? Really take those opportunities to get some fresh air, right? These are all pieces of self-care, and it's also important for your employer, right? For your colleagues, your team, to be encouraging this of each other, all right? And most importantly, set clear boundaries, right? For virtual work, respecting different time zones and communication preferences, okay? Depending on the type of work you do and where you do it. Supporting lived experiences is also crucial. You know, you don't want to obligate team members with lived experience to share their personal experiences with you. You don't have rights to that just because they're a person with lived experience and they're working in this environment, right? They get to share what they want to share when they want to share it. So you don't get the right to say, you have to disclose, right? People with lived experience can inform their work without disclosure, right? But you want to stay connected, right? To prevent isolation through communities of practice, mentorship programs, and informal check-ins with folks with lived experience, particularly in this work. It can be challenging to have lived experience in the child welfare system and experience working in it at the same time. It's essential to inform all employees about how to seek support and ensure that they have a go-to person for that assistance. Understand that psychological safety can be misused, right? Discomfort doesn't always mean a lack of safety, and growth happens in discomfort, right? And Tiffany said that earlier. Last, accountability is crucial for a safe environment. We've talked about this earlier. It was the first thing that we said. We're going to repeat it here. Accountability is crucial for a safe environment. It is built on communication, safety planning, and setting group norms and values. You need a plan for safety and accountability. Say that again, you have to plan for safety and accountability by asking key questions about recognizing safety, addressing violations, right? And cultivating safe practices. You want to reinforce positive behavior with bidirectional feedback. You have to be able to give feedback and you have to be able to receive feedback. That's critical, right? You want to be able to do kudos, right? Elevate and uplift your colleagues and acknowledge folks. And finally, let's reflect on these points and how to implement them. I would love to see folks drop things in the chat around these practices and what has fostered accountability or proactive safety planning for you in the chat.
And Ishan, I want to lift something you just shared. Accountability. When we hear accountability, sometimes you can have a reflex response like afraid, a fear, like, ooh, something bad. As Ishan just mentioned, accountability is not just the negative pieces. It's not just negativity. It isn't negativity. It's checks and balances, but it's also, hey, let me acknowledge you for the good things that you're doing too.
Yeah.
So there's that positive reinforcement and then that accountability piece of, hey, this is the expectation in the space, but how do we meet each other there? How do we meet each other there so that we can have this in the space? What's working? What's not working? You know, and having that conversation. It's part of CQI. How are we holding ourselves accountable? It's literally the nature of our work. So don't be afraid of accountability. Look at accountability as an opportunity to improve.
Absolutely. You know, take it a step further. Ensure that you have a framework for feedback, right? Not everybody understands what feedback means, how to give it, what's crucial, right? And have a framework for having those crucial conversations and train your team members, your staff members in that feedback framework and a crucial conversation framework so that you are able to engage in those conversations, right? If you're asking for feedback, be specific, right? About what feedback you actually need and want, right? So important. Thank you, Tiffany, for those additional pieces on accountability. It's critical. So now that we've discussed characteristics of inclusive teams and strategies to cultivate safety within inclusive teams, now we need to start to think about how we can cultivate belonging within our teams. Traditionally, what we see is leadership has been top down. That's most approaches, right? Very hierarchical, right? Where power is concentrated in the hands of a single leader or a few folks at the very top. And this can lead to limited accountability and transparency. And it can often create an environment that lacks safe and brave spaces. Someone put in the chat earlier, right? A lot of spaces in child welfare are unsafe, right? Well, that's why we're doing this work. That's why we're having this conversation. So you can do your part, right? And hopefully hold your team members accountable to do their part, right? So that they can express themselves openly and honestly, and that you can too. Now let's imagine a shift from this traditional model to a more transformational approach. right, to power and leadership. In this model, we want to recognize that power and authority are not confined to a single individual, but is shared among all team members. By neutralizing power dynamics, we can create an environment where everyone feels valued and empowered. What positive changes could occur if you neutralized power and shared it among everybody? Right? I invite you to drop a couple of things in the chat, right, around what could occur if you shared. And as you're thinking about that, on the screen are a few reflection questions you can ask yourself to reflect on if you've cultivated a space of belonging, right? Different from inclusivity, belonging, right? Take a moment to answer the first question. Have we built mutual trust to lay the groundwork for creating psychological safety?
The screen shows a list of questions. What essential differences are team members bringing to the assessment? What considerations must be in place to meet all team members' needs? Are any team members not adequately supported or represented before the assessment? What preparation is needed to have a productive completion of the assessment? Is our shared space safe enough for the team members to complete the assessment honestly?
If the answer is yes, you should be asking yourself, how can we build on this groundwork? And if the answer is no, you have to start, right? You have to start creating that safety. You have to start creating that trust, right? In both scenarios, whether the answer is yes or no, there's still more work to be done, right? Susan, I love that you put in the chat more ownership over projects that are a group. Absolutely. More ownership. I love that. Fostering a space for honesty and vulnerable conversations. Absolutely, right? Less stress and pressure on the leader own, right? Sometimes we have this idea that, it's our leader's fault until we get promoted and we're a leader. And then we realize that they're as stressed as we are. They have a lot of pressures on them too, right? They're going against the grain themselves as much as they can, right? It's not the role. Again, it's how you lead. It's who you are and how you show up in that space. Love it. Thank you for those contributions. All right. Each team member has a role in decision-making, fostering mutual respect and accountability and transparency. This shared power dynamic helps build and encourages open communication, leading to a more inclusive and psychologically safe team environment. The power you wield in different spaces creates opportunities for these transformational shifts. You want to invite opinions and perspectives into the conversation. Ask for input and ideas from all team members and be clear about how decisions will be made, right? Sometimes the decision's not going to be made by the team, but you need to be clear about that up front. Okay, be intentional about diverse teaming when improving documents or policies and practices, right? You want to be helpful in that space, right? By inviting those different perspectives. Encourage purposeful storytelling, right? Encourage your team members to share their individual stories or a bit about themselves, i.e. vulnerability, strategic vulnerability, right? Understanding another person's story can dissolve interpersonal barriers and reveal the many layers and dimensions and experiences that make them unique, right? Be mindful that everyone has different comfort levels with vulnerability and what they share at work, and accept people for how they show up in these more informal or personal conversations, okay? As a team member, you can help build trusting relationships by considering setting up a formal or informal mentoring program, initiate coffee chats, someone put that in the chat earlier, with team members, participate in communities of practice, or host open office hours for connection, right? It's also important to check in on one another, okay? Whether it's during a meeting or via message or in a coffee chat the next day, take time to check in on your team members, especially when they have a lot on their plate or if you notice a change in their demeanor. Pay attention to your people, right? They may have things going on in their life, and the truth is life impacts the way we show up at work, right? And the way we do our work. And most importantly, be transparent, Okay, this means everyone has access to the same information and is on the same page, and that's why we emphasize open and honest communication. This includes sharing information about job openings, evaluation outcomes, planning processes, etc. All right. Remember, everyone plays a part in making teams inclusive, regardless of their role or leadership position. Okay. So now we're going to jump into some more conversation. Okay, as we move into our discussion on inclusive teaming, I'd like us to start really reflecting on these few questions. Let's think about what it means to be a part of an inclusive team and how we can actively promote inclusivity in our own teams. Okay. First, consider the words that come to mind when you think of an inclusive team. What are some of the qualities or characteristics that define such a team? Inclusive teams are often described with words like welcoming, respectful, supportive, diverse. What is it for you? All right. And then we're going to think about what are, some examples of actions that you've taken to promote inclusivity in your team. I'm really curious to hear that. What have you done? All right. I'm going to stop sharing. All right, folks, you know what time it is. Let's drop things in the chat or come off mute. Raise your hand. I'd love to hear it. Tiffany, as people are thinking, reflecting on these prompts, are there any actions that you've taken to promote inclusivity in your team?
Noticing who's talking and who's not talking.
Mhm.
And that also includes like being self-aware of when I'm talking too much. I get passionate and I start motor mouthing. But then I also feel like that I do at times intentionally notice who's not speaking as much or who's not on camera or who's not the first person to always speak and gently inviting them into the conversation. And I think sometimes in different spaces that might look differently, where in some spaces people don't want to be called in. And in other spaces, it's okay. It depends on the culture that you set in the space that you're working in. So as I've worked across spaces, that's something that I've picked up from there. Um, Another thing is also embracing diversity, like neurodiversity in this space. I'm a neurodivergent person, and I know that I don't approach things or my work in the same way that my peers do all the time. But for me, it's what it means is having leadership, supervisors, project leads who understand that give me what the end goal is, we're gonna get there. Just trust the process. Give me the end goal and we'll get there. And to have people like Ishan or Tet was on the call the other day, or just other people that's a part of my team who, whether they're leaders or whether they're just my peers and colleagues, because again, we all can be leaders, even if we don't have a formal position of power. And so I think when I have peers that are supportive and check in, and I do the same, sending a private message or, hey, I noticed that you're not yourself today. You okay? Are you good? Do you need space to check in? You know, being proactive about um checking in when you notice instead of always relying on people to express what they need, because sometimes people don't know what they need. To be honest, that doesn't mean that they won't figure it out, but that in the moment sometimes it's just a simple check-in, and noticing that's really powerful and helpful and creates a space for people to feel like that they're a part of the team, um and not just as like producers but as humans.
That's key, right? Not just as producers, but as humans, because undoubtedly there's someone sitting on the call that's like, that's a lot to do in the workplace, or that's not the space for that, right? Well, that might be not be the space that you feel like you have to show up in that way, but that doesn't mean that's not the needs of other people, right? And it costs us nothing to be human first, right? It costs us nothing to check on somebody. It costs us nothing to be kind, right? To say, okay, I notice you're showing up differently, right? What can I do for you? What do you need in this moment? What can I take off of your plate? How can I help you? All right. Or do you need me to not even ask about solutions? Do you need me to just listen? Right? Being really clear about that. Folks are really dropping some great gems in the chat here about shared responsibility, roundtable discussions, really understanding and knowing the personality of each team member. And then it looks like Tashi put something about doing team building activities and getting outside of the work, how critical that is. I mean, we talked earlier about thinking and assuming that we all have the same level of empathy. We're all doing this work the same. But again, because we're all different, if we don't take the time to get to know each other and what that means for us, what are our values, how we show up to the work, we're not going to really be able to practice in the same way. We're not going to know that on a deeper level, right? And so that's really important to understand and spend time being community with our team members, right? Prioritizing that, because that is also a part of the work. Right? And then also make sure that if you're doing team building activities, make sure you're doing things that are inclusive, right? Consider what type of team activity that you're doing, the accessibility of those team activities, right? Are you doing things that involve alcohol and there's someone that doesn't drink for whatever reasons, right? Just be really conscious, right, of who is on your team and what they may need, and really craft team building activities around what will meet the needs of the entire team. Right. And if that means y'all can't go to the bowling place that also has the bar, then you got to figure out something else, right? To support all of your team members, right? Because that's what's really important. That's what makes it a space of belonging and inclusivity.
Ishan, you said two things that I would love for you to kind of speak to. One, you talked about kindness, and I want you to differentiate the difference between kindness and niceness. So I'm going to start there.
Sure. So being nice to me sometimes means placating. It sometimes means protecting and fixing, right? You don't want to hurt people, so you got to be nice, right? But being kind to me means being honest. It means being direct. It means helping people along the journey with transparency, right? And so for me, being kind is allowing people the space to learn and grow, to fall, and not be cruel about it, right? Being constructive about the feedback that you're giving them. That's kind, right? When you're being nice, often, I don't know about you, but when you're being nice, sometimes it feels forced. Right? Oh, I don't really want to hurt their feelings. So let me just say it this way. But maybe I'm beating around the bush. I'm not really saying the direct thing that needs to be said that may help them grow, may help them do some deeper self-reflection. And so that's what I think about niceness and kindness. I'm curious as to what you think.
Ishan, I think the big distinction that I'm hearing is niceness as being an act of tolerance versus kindness as being an act of intentionality and love. And yes, we do human services work, and I do feel like that love is embedded in the work that we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Tolerance versus love that we're giving. Rebecca put something great in the chat about using personality style assessments to better understand how people show up in their work. So yeah, do different activities like that. A couple assessments I really love to have my team members take is a positive intelligence and a saboteur assessment. You can find those online. I really love those because it gives insight to how you show up, right? And how that might impact the work that you're doing. So I encourage you to do assessments. Absolutely. All right, y'all, I'm going to get back to sharing the screen, but continue to drop the gems in the chat. Please, please, please be copy and pasting these if you haven't thus far. All right, here we go. Thank you so much for the rich discussion, Tiffany, and for those contributing in the chat.
I know one I dropped, I said Berkshire. I think it's the Berkman assessment instead of Berkshire. I always mess it up. And then Ishan mentioned a few, if you're able to drop those in the chat while I work on this. So as we're talking about inclusive teaming, it's also important to recognize power and group dynamics. So we do always have to assume that there is some type of power and group dynamic present when we're in space with other people. And so we're going to go ahead and touch on a few of those techniques for equalizing the power and group dynamics in spaces. First, let's talk about group agreements. If you all notice, we came into the meeting setting the stage for how we hope to engage with each other as we share space with one another. And what that did is it not only created a set of guidelines, but it was really equity focused. It really centered being able to foster a space that was inclusive, is equitable, does celebrate diversity in voices and in representation in discussion. So we use these agreements to share power and build a culture of collaboration. So I want to remind everyone that each person is accountable for and brave enough to intervene when agreements are not followed. So it's okay to call people in, as Erin mentioned in the chat. There's nothing wrong with that. Do it in a kind way. Be intentional. Be cautious with agreements like trust one another or assume good intentions, as what it might do is dismiss the previous experiences that people may have, and it's not as easy for some as it is for others to come in assuming that someone won't create harm. And that's where that trust building happens. That's where you're intentional about the relationship and trust building. When you're thinking about teaming dynamics, how are you pouring in and investing in that as much as you are investing in the technical skills and abilities of your team? Because trust can be fostered through knowing that my peer has the skills to do the thing, but trust is also fostered by a person being consistent, a person being reliable, a space being consistent, reliable, transparent, different characteristics of healthy teaming dynamics. The next is being intentional about diversity. It's crucial to ensure that you have diverse representation in discussions, thinking about who's not in the space right now, who's not contributing to this conversation. That doesn't mean that there's going to always be everyone in the meeting, but how are we creating other spaces for people to contribute to the efforts that we're using, the conversations that we're having, the tools that we're developing, the system change work that we're doing? How are we incorporating diverse voices, including lived experience voices? And how are we centering those? And so it's vital for us to ensure that we're not only considering racial diversity, cultural diversity, age, or gender, and heck, not just even professional backgrounds. It's also considering neurodiversity and breaking away from those neuronorm expectations when we're collaborating together, assessing where your team is at, and not just creating expectations, not considering the people that you have in front of you. Providing useful information and context is another key technique. Creating shared language. So this is my little plug, like a State Farm commercial. We have a shared language DEI document, terms and definitions document on the center's website. It's also on the worksheet that we gave you all as an example for what it looks like to create shared language around a specific topic area. so that as you're going into conversations and discussion, that you all have that same baseline knowledge and understanding. And it also is helpful for when you're having new people enter into your teams and spaces, for them to also have that shared baseline knowledge and understanding. And a lot of that shared knowledge, collective knowledge and understanding is not just about the culture that we foster, but how we're documenting that. So using those resources can be very helpful in enhancing the teaming dynamics and power and group dynamics. Next is shared facilitation. That's a great example of addressing power dynamics. So by sharing facilitation responsibilities during meetings, power is distributed amongst each participant in the space. And this requires a shared commitment to supporting each other. But not just support, but recognizing each other's capacity, assessing each other's capacity, because equity, shared decision-making does not always mean Ishan has 1/4 of the pie, I have 1/4 of the pie, Caroline has 1/4, and Maya has 1/4. What that means is sometimes Ishan might be able to bring 2/4, and I might be able to bring 2/4. But next time, Caroline might be able to bring, like, we think about how we factor in capacity into shared responsibility into the space, and what that collective experience is like for each other. Remember, power is a social construct, and we can design spaces where people experience their own and others' power differently. Amplify the voices of those typically marginalized, and value the expertise from lived experiences as much as formal knowledge. And remember, we cannot hold on to the power of defining what expertise is in all instances, because then we limit ourselves to what the possibilities of what people can contribute to the space is. And yeah, I'm going to pass it on to you, Ishan, if you want to add anything.
No, I don't have anything to add. I feel like you knocked that out the park. I'm telling you, intentionality is the thing that stuck out for me.
All right. So now we're going to move on to the discussion, and we're going to spend about 5 minutes here. And so even if you're not in management position, you can still be a leader. The main difference between formal and informal leadership is how we experience accountability. But when we're fostering that culture and environment of accountability, then we all have that shared accountability to contribute to the team as leaders and as learners. So take a moment to reflect on the discussion prompts on your worksheet in the chat, or if you want to share out loud. How can we collectively shift our mindsets and practices to decenter the formal leader and embrace a more distributed approach to leadership in our teams? And consider aspects such as decision-making, accountability, and how to foster an inclusive team culture. We're almost over, y'all. We got 8 minutes. We have 8 minutes. But I'm looking forward to seeing you all's responses, or, if anyone wants to hop on camera and unmute themselves and share. Or I see Suzanne or Susan asking for everyone.
Sarah,
Go ahead.
Hello. I'm Sarah. I'm from Texas, and I want to say that, hey, it's sometimes really hard to be vulnerable, and that is the biggest thing, I think, to being open and listening to the next steps, it's hard. It's to shift and let go, and that's really hard.
Absolutely hard. It's absolutely hard. But you could baby step, right? You say you're having a really bad day and something has really impacted your family, right? Being vulnerable can say, hey, I'm not going to show up myself today. I've had a lot going on at home, right? Or I have some things that are distracting me. It might impact how I show up. And that's it, which it doesn't disclose your personal information, your family's information, none of those things, but is an act of vulnerability, right? So baby step it, right? And get a feel for what it looks like to be vulnerable in spaces and show up authentically in that way.
We had someone's hands raised and then I noticed it went down. Did you want to share still, Annalise?
Yes, I just didn't want to interrupt Ishan. I wanted to say one of the things that I learned when my kids were toddlers is to apologize when you're wrong, because you as parent are not expert. That was one of the first things I learned, to listen to Gen Z. And I think they are the ones that are teaching us collective leadership on a daily basis. And so I really respect my daughters and try to lift their voices up. And so trying to model being a good mom has helped me be a better leader in life, because I am not an expert about anything except that I love them. And so that's kind of where I start from with people.
Annalise, I love that you shared that. And I think sometimes we don't realize how hard it is sometimes. We normalize the concept of having generational gaps in work now, right? But we're not acknowledging the challenges that sometimes come with it, and that we must honor each other's expertise and knowledge, and not feel like because, oh, I was raised in this era, that what I know is better. And another thing that I do know is that this is just maybe not a joke, but a reality, that the newer generation of workers, they don't tolerate toxic work environments. The moment that they feel it, they're like, peace, I'm out. And so it's very important, if we're trying to keep, younger generations, like we're trying to attract that younger generation of leaders. It's also important, it's really important to check the culture of the environment, because there's less and less tolerance. And I think, like you said, they're setting the example for how the workforce is transforming, and also creating a brave space for people who have been working in the practice for a while, to make better decisions about themselves and to transform the environment to a more healthy and safe workspace. That's it. My apologies. All right. Okay, so now we're going to move into some additional strategies and considerations when neutralizing power and setting the stage for group dynamics.
The list of power and group dynamics reads: collaborative vision, shared leadership, inclusive decision-making, distributed expertise, mutual accountability, learning curve, open communication, empowered problem-solving, racial equity champions, celebrating team achievements, cross-center engagement, wellness, and support.
I'm not going to read all of them, but I will point out just a few. One is having a collaborative vision. So as a team, our role is to collaboratively envision what success looks like for us. If there's no shared vision, then sometimes we're operating like this. When we have that shared vision, we can operate like this together in unison. And this isn't just about meeting business goals, but creating an environment where every team member thrives and contributes meaningfully. Another is learning culture. Let's foster a learning culture where everyone is both a teacher and a learner. And sometimes we have in our mind that leaders just lead. But a good leader is often learning from those who are around them on an ongoing learning process. So just remember that with leadership comes responsibility. With responsibility comes learning, and vice versa. So our collective growth contributes to the team's adaptability and resilience, and each team member plays a role in our continuous improvement. And the last thing that I want to lift up is wellness and support. So taking care of one another is a shared responsibility, collective care. And our role includes supporting each other's well-being so that folks can move into self-care and foster a positive work environment, and ensuring that every team member feels supported in their professional journey. So that eloquently moves us onto the self-care piece in our work. So oftentimes working in child welfare, we experience compassion fatigue, burnout, secondary trauma and stress, and racial trauma because my apologies, because it's deeply embedded in our practice. And self-care is a tool that can be used as a way to be proactive and responsive to the impact of working in child welfare practice. Psychologically safe teams encourage and promote individual well-being alongside collective wellness, and it extends beyond merely addressing professional stressors. So some goals are taking care of your physical and psychological health, managing and reducing stress, honoring emotional and spiritual needs, and fostering and sustaining relationships. And lastly, achieving an equilibrium across one's personal, school, and work life.
The bonus activity is to answer the following questions. What thoughts, experiences, or any additional insights do you have on ways that you prioritize self-care in your life? It can be a specific practice or routine that contributes to your well-being or a resource.
So here we have a bonus activity that you can use with your team. And that is, it's an opportunity to reflect on what self-care looks like in the space. You can do it as an individual, or you can have a conversation with your team about this so that you can set a culture where you all honor self-care and collective care in your workspace. So now we're going to move.
Alrighty.
Oh.
Yeah, so we are now out of time. So I just want to encourage you all to look at the resources that we have for you in the worksheet. And this is your call to action, right? Do one thing. We challenge you. We invite you to do one thing tomorrow that is going to make your teams more inclusive, right? Do some planning, use your worksheet, and use the resources. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yes. And the worksheet is in the chat, and you can find it also in the resource hub along with the PowerPoint. And both the PowerPoint and the worksheet has resources listed. We hope that you can take time after this call to take care of yourself. Get some water, stretch your legs, get some sunlight, touch the grass. No, that was a joke. That one was a joke.
Text on Screen reads, this video was developed for the Child Welfare Virtual Expo by the Capacity Building Center for States and is sponsored by the Children's Bureau. Its content does not necessarily reflect the views and policies of the Children's Bureau.